Chuck's emphasis on Bible exposition not only changed a church, it changed a generation, because thousands of young men went out around the country and around the world and started Calvary Chapel style.
October 3rd, 2013, Chuck Smith took his final breath, and within months, everything he built began to crack. For 50 years, one man held together a movement that changed American Christianity. Thousands of churches, millions of believers, a Jesus revolution born on California beaches. But Chuck Smith never named a successor. He never built a structure. He never prepared for the one day that was always coming, the day he would be gone. What happened next would expose a painful truth nobody wanted to face. To understand the collapse, you have to understand the miracle that came before it. The 1960s. America was on fire. Young people rejected their parents' religion. They rejected the suits, the stiff pews, the cold traditions. Churches closed their doors to anyone who looked different. But one pastor did the opposite. Chuck Smith was not flashy. He was not famous. He was a quiet, middle-aged man in Costa Mesa, California. But he had one thing most pastors lacked. He actually wanted to reach the people nobody else wanted. Hippies showed up barefoot. Teenagers showed up high. Drifters showed up broken. And Chuck let them in. No dress code, no judgment. Just the Bible and an open door. Word spread fast. The small chapel overflowed. Services spilled onto the lawn, then into tents, then into homes across the region. This was not church growth. This was a spiritual explosion. They called it the Jesus movement, and Calvary Chapel became its beating heart. Thousands were baptized in the Pacific Ocean. New music poured out of living rooms. Young converts became young pastors. Churches multiplied across California, then across America, then around the world. It was raw, it was real, it was revival. But here is what nobody talked about. The whole thing rested on one man's shoulders, one man's voice, one man's presence. Chuck Smith did not build an institution. He built a family, and families work beautifully until the father is gone. So what held Calvary Chapel together when it grew beyond one man's reach? That is where the trouble began. By the 1980s, Calvary Chapel was no longer a single church. It was an empire. Over 1,000 churches carried the Calvary name. The dove logo became one of the most recognized symbols in American Christianity. Pastors trained under Chuck planted congregations in every state, then in other countries. And at the center of it all stood one man. Chuck Smith taught verse by verse. No gimmicks, no performance, just scripture explained simply. People loved it. Pastors copied it. The Calvary style became a brand. But here is what few people noticed. There was no headquarters, no board of elders with real authority, no official doctrine everyone signed, no system to keep churches accountable to each other. Calvary Chapel was held together by trust. Trust in Chuck, trust in his judgment, trust that his presence would always be there to settle disputes. And that trust worked for decades. But something else was happening beneath the surface. Pastors started developing their own visions. Some leaned charismatic, some leaned conservative. Some wanted modern worship, others wanted tradition. As long as Chuck was alive, these differences stayed quiet. Nobody wanted to challenge the founder. Nobody wanted to cause division. So they waited. They waited while Chuck aged. They waited while questions piled up. They waited while the movement grew too large for any one man to manage. And Chuck, he kept leading. He kept teaching. He kept holding everything together through sheer presence. But he never answered the one question everyone was afraid to ask. What happens when you are gone? Some say Chuck avoided the question on purpose. Others say he trusted God to work it out. Either way, the result was the same. No successor, no structure, no plan. An empire built on one voice, and that voice was fading. The cracks were already forming. Most people just could not see them yet, but they would. Soon enough, everyone would. The signs were there for years. You just had to know where to look. Behind the conferences and the baptisms, tension was building. Pastors who once agreed started disagreeing, quietly at first, then not so quietly. Some wanted Calvary to stay exactly as Chuck designed it. Simple, traditional, unchanged. Others believed the movement had to evolve, reach new generations, adapt to culture. Both sides claimed they understood Chuck's true vision. Both sides believed they were right. And Chuck? He tried to hold the center, but the center was already cracking. Theology started drifting. Some churches embraced charismatic gifts openly. Others rejected them completely. Some pastors preached end times prophecy every week. Others never mentioned it. There was no doctrinal statement to settle the debates, no council to make rulings, no authority beyond Chuck himself. And Chuck was running out of time. His health declined through the 2000s. Cancer came. Treatments followed. The man who built the movement was clearly in his final chapter. Yet still, no successor was named. Pastors whispered in private. Who would lead after Chuck? Who had the authority? Who could possibly hold this thing together? Nobody knew, and nobody dared ask publicly. Meanwhile, the next generation was watching. Younger pastors saw the confusion. They saw the lack of structure. They saw an empire without a blueprint. Some started preparing their own plans. Others distanced themselves from the Calvary name. Still others waited to see which way the wind would blow. The movement that once felt like family now felt like a collection of strangers sharing a logo. Unity was not real. It was borrowed. Borrowed from one man's reputation. Borrowed from one man's relationships. Borrowed from one man's life. And borrowed time always runs out. When Chuck entered hospice care in 2013, the countdown began. Everyone knew the moment was coming. The question was no longer if Calvary Chapel would face a crisis. The question was how bad that crisis would be. The answer came faster than anyone expected. October 3, 2013. Chuck Smith was gone. The tributes poured in. Pastors across the world honored his memory. Services celebrated his legacy. For a brief moment, Calvary Chapel looked united in grief. But grief does not last forever. And neither did the unity. Within months, the fighting began. Chuck's original church in Costa Mesa moved in one direction. A group of senior pastors moved in another. Both claimed to represent the true Calvary Chapel. Both claimed to carry Chuck's legacy. The Calvary Chapel Association formed to preserve pastoral independence. Costa Mesa pushed for more structure and oversight. Two visions, one name, zero agreement. Meetings turned tense. Friendships dissolved. Pastors who had served together for decades now barely spoke. And the Christ, who once unified them, his name was invoked by every side. But his peace was nowhere to be found. Churches started choosing sides. Some aligned with Costa Mesa. Others joined the association. Some quietly removed the dove logo and walked away entirely. The fragmentation was no longer hidden. It was public. It was painful. It was permanent. What had taken 50 years to build was unraveling in months. And the saddest part? Everyone saw it coming. Everyone knew the structure was not there. Everyone knew the succession was not planned. But knowing and preparing are two different things. Chuck Smith built a movement on trust. But trust cannot survive without something stronger underneath it. And Calvary Chapel had nothing underneath. The collapse was not coming. It had already begun. Today, Calvary Chapel is not one movement. It is many. Some churches kept the name, but changed the vision. Others kept the vision, but dropped the name. Hundreds continue operating as if nothing happened. But something did happen. The center disappeared. Walk into one Calvary Chapel, and you might find traditional worship. Walk into another, and find fog machines and light shows. Visit one, and hear verse-by-verse teaching. Visit another, and hear topical sermons that never open the Bible. Same dove, different churches. No shared identity. The Calvary Chapel Association still exists. So does the network connected to Costa Mesa. Other groups have formed with their own standards and affiliations. But none of them speak for the whole movement, because there is no whole movement anymore. Pastors who once gathered at the same conferences now host competing events. Leaders who once shared pulpits now avoid each other. The legacy war never really ended. It just went quiet. And the Jesus movement fire? That flame still flickers in some places. Faithful pastors still teach Scripture. Faithful churches still reach the lost. But the movement that once shook America, that unified revival that welcomed the broken and baptized them in the ocean, that movement is gone. What remains is an echo, a memory, a Christ-haunted reminder of what was and what could have been. Calvary Chapel did not fall because of scandal. It did not collapse because of sin. It fell because it trusted one man to be the foundation, and no man can carry that weight forever. Chuck Smith never wanted to be the center. He wanted Jesus to be the center. But movements do not always follow intentions. Movements follow gravity. And for 50 years, Chuck Smith was the gravitational force holding everything in orbit. When that force disappeared, the planets scattered. Some found new orbits. Others drifted into darkness. Still others crashed into each other. The lesson is not complicated. Movements built on one voice cannot survive when that voice goes silent. Revivals sustained by personality fade when the personality is gone. Structure is not the enemy of the Spirit. It is the container that keeps the fire from burning itself out. Calvary Chapel learned this too late. But here is the question that haunts everyone who studies this story. If a movement this powerful, this sincere, this spirit-filled could fragment so completely, what movement is safe? What church is immune? What leader today is building something that will outlast their own heartbeat? The collapse of Calvary Chapel was not an ending. It was a warning.